Hello, welcome to today's HR Huddle. I'm Tamera Loerzel, and with me is my colleague, Samantha Mansfield. Thank you, Sam, for being with me today.
My pleasure.
And we cannot believe we're in the last week of September. So we think this should probably happen every quarter. But as we look at the end of the year, we thought we'd stop and say, what are the top priorities in HR and talent and developing talent and attracting talent, and what are the top priorities for the rest of the year that like must-haves, which means we might need to identify some things that we need to put into 2025, which is the second piece. What are our top priorities for 2025? And more specifically, what we want to talk about is how they align with the firm's overall strategies and key priorities. And we know a lot of firms are doing a lot of strategic planning right now. We're facilitating a lot of retreats, partner and leadership retreats. So we thought we'd talk about HR's role in leadership retreats and firm retreats. And then more specifically, again, how your HR and talent strategies align with the firm strategies. So maybe we start with kind of a short list. I don't know how short it will be for the year-end priorities. And that's probably one of the things that we have to do as a leader is shorten the list and get real and say, what must we get done? What are the most important things that are going to make a difference? And we are always trying to narrow. We always say top three. What are our top three initiatives or top three priorities? And that's not easy. I think that's one of the more difficult things to do as leaders is to narrow those, start somewhere. You will get momentum, you will get traction, but we've got to figure out what that is. So we can start with the list, and then we can say, all right, then your job is going to be, say, what are the top three for you, depending on what's going on in your firm. So Samantha, do you want to start? Do you have a place you want to start?
Sure. And I so appreciate that you really emphasized the priorities, because we have a big wish list, and we then just have to really develop the must-haves and the priorities. And then the other stuff's nice to have if we can work it in, right? So one of the things that I was thinking about is in the fourth quarter, there's a lot of technical update learning that happens, right? And of course, tax law changes and all of that we need for getting ready for the peak season as that's coming. But what I was also thinking is just today, I was doing training with some seniors and supervisors and managers, is that for us to have a really successful season, we need to brush off some of the dust of inefficiencies we have with lack of delegating properly, poor communication strategies, maybe not being so good about talking about expectations for my work hours and when you can reach me, because in the non-peak season, we get a little more flex and movability and time off. And so really brushing off what those best practices are and reminding the team of what are some of the good habits that we need to have in place. We're not communicating well, and when we're not delegating effectively, we can have all the knowledge we want, but we're not pushing work through well, and it certainly affects the margin and the profitability. So when we're working on what our learning is, those were some of the topics that were really striking me that probably could use a brush up here in the fourth quarter with some lunch and learns or meetings, that kind of thing.
Love it. I love it. And yeah, I think, we think we know these things. I think that's one of the things that we teach is one of our main leadership distinctions is, I already know. So it doesn't matter what you know, it's what are you doing? So I might say I know to delegate, or I might know time management, but it's kind of like going to the dentist twice a year. We should always be refreshing and say, what can I do better? And how am I applying it today inside my team today, inside of who I am as a leader today? And how can we be more unified in our approach as well? It's not just about me. It's how are we being unified in our approach? And so I think a lot of those skills development is crucial. And for us to stop and remember and say, all right, what did I stop doing? Maybe I should pick it back up, or what could I try newly in today's environment? And I think that's really important to identify. While you're talking about, peak periods, I think another thing to think about is what are some of those proactive things we need to get done during, peak periods? and identifying, helping our team identify some of those things.
Mhm.
And by the way, some of it, speaking of dentists, is making sure all your appointments, sometimes we just don't feel like we have the time for appointments. A friend of mine called me on Friday, and she's, like a working mom, big job, big career, getting her kids' appointments scheduled. And she's like, I need my appointment scheduled. And so, we were just like, okay, we're going to make a pact together. Like, we're just going to handle it. And it's just got to be like a client appointment. But there's other things that we're working on within talent, that we want to do inside of, those peak periods, but help our team, do that as well. Vacations and PTO is another one to make sure your people are taking time off. And then there's like some housekeeping, if you will, or, that standard, twice a year type thing is it's compensation review time for a lot of firms. I know sometimes we do that mid-year. We do it different times of the year depending on when our promotions are, but often we do it at the end of the year. A couple things. We got to be looking at benchmarks beyond public accounting. We need to be looking at compensation for other business degrees, because accounting is behind all of the other business degrees, including business administration. And the National Pipeline Advisory Group has published some statistics on that, and they have some different resources that can point you to that if you want to take a look at those. But we need to be looking at what are the different data analytics, actuaries, finance, what are they paying for starting salaries? How can we, look at this? There's a big bump if you go up through senior managers, et cetera, up to partners. How can we push some of that down so you don't feel like you have to give everybody a raise all the way up? But what can we do to kind of right size that the whole way? But looking at our starting salaries and say, how do we, figure that out? And then what are the right increases this year? We're not seeing that they're as much as they might have been the last year or two, but there's still increases. So do some comparisons with that would be our advice. And then also just all of the different legislation and law changes around overtime, minimum overtime compensation thresholds. And I know here in Minnesota, they passed a required sick time for every 30 hours you work. I haven't stopped to compare. Is that national? Is that, are there other states doing that? But, you are probably trying to pay attention to what that is, but stopping to figure that out, making sure we're implementing those things, across the board. So those are a few things also to think about.
Yeah, and I would like to add on the metrics front too that it's a great time to speak with leadership on what are the measures that we are conveying and having transparency with our team about. Because are we measuring the behaviors that we really want people doing? And then are we showing them what those results are? So too often we're still hearing the main metrics that team members are getting is realization and utilization, but yet you want different things out of them. You want them behaving and more like owners, and you want them taking on more complicated work, and you want them maybe starting to look for opportunities to cross-sell services and all of that. But do we have the metrics in place that we're actually then showing people how they're progressing? Because they're going to focus on the metric that they're actually getting measured on and they see, because that's what they, can get concerned about, how they're being evaluated and what they're going to get measured on in their performance reviews, like you were just saying. And of course, their compensation is then based on, or bonuses or anything like that are based on. So it's a good reminder time with management that do we have that? Do we have a way to report it? And have we clearly broken down for people what steps they can take to actually make movement on those metrics? So I think that's important. And another one, if your firm hasn't done it, while people are out in training, they're talking to other professionals, is have you talked to your team about what the AI usage policy is? Now, if you have an IT team, that probably should be coming from them. But if that hasn't come out yet, this would be another good one that you could, instigate, get them talking about it. Are we able to use ChatGPT, Copilot, any of these other ones that are out there? And if so, what is the team allowed to use it for? Because you have a lot of, and it's not always the younger people, that are hearing about all these different use cases. And if they're on X or Reddit, or even, like I said, going into these trainings, they're hearing about some of the really cool things that this generative AI can do. And if you guys haven't had a conversation about how that can be incorporated into the workflow, I would say that's a great reminder that you could put out there, so that people don't make a mistake, or something is leveraged using that technology and the firm doesn't know. So I think it's time to get proactive on that one. And if it hasn't happened, you could be a champion of that.
Yeah, love that. Love that. I think one other for the quarter, and we'd love to hear what your list for the quarter is too, by the way. You can share it when we post this. You can email us, but we're interested. But one other that is top of mind as you were talking there, Samantha, is making sure we're staffed properly. I know that's something we've all been working on, is capacity, and we're recruiting and we're working on interns. But also, if you're doing outsourcing or offshoring, or you haven't started and haven't tipped your toe in, you've got to get those plans finalized right now for the January season. And so if you're going to increase, maybe you're doing some incremental increases in what you've done, this past year. Maybe we haven't tried it and you're going to try it in tax or an audit or CAS or some group. They're right now booking resources. So, talk to different partners about that. If, you want to know who they are, you can let us know. But there are many, many out there, and they offer in different ways to fill that talent gap that you have, and different structures and different things to do it. But you want to get that planned with your service lines and industry groups right now to make sure that you have the right team in place, come January. So they're going to be focusing on that right now. And that leads me to then figuring out priorities for 2025. And where does HR and talent fit? And Samantha, you said something about like coordinating with IT about your AI policy, or coordinating with marketing about recruiting. I think that's one of the things operation leads, we could probably do a better job. I mean, communication is always a challenge, but how do we be better coordinated in our initiatives and leverage each other better and give each other an inside view of what our priorities are, so we could work together instead of it being a surprise or duplicative, et cetera. And we love it when firms are including their operation leads, or key marketing, HR, IT, operations folks, COO, whatever that might be. And so that they're part of the planning and discussion and can input to it, number one. And then number two, they often have several of the big takeaways. And so I think that's important to understand. And if it's super HR or talent heavy, how are we going to prioritize that? What other resources could we leverage? How do we narrow where we start and then maybe revisit in June, but also integrate it, with the service lines, what their strategies are, what their goals are. Are they starting a new service, specialty group? Are there new industries popping up? Are we wanting to invest in specific industries? Which leads to just pure number of talent, number of FTEs, but also training and learning and development and coaching and specializations. And, we need to, figure out all of those things. And then maybe we need to get a better presence on the website on that. So we've got to coordinate with marketing. And there's a lot of things that, as the HR talent leads, you can direct and help facilitate and help ensure that those things get done. And so even if you're not, you could be sitting there listening going, Tamera and Samantha, I really wish we were invited to the strategic planning meetings. We would say, okay, then go find out. And we would talk to a couple different people, obviously talk to the managing partner. If you have an executive committee, talk to them, but, get an understanding of what the priorities are, and then coordinate with the other operations teams, come back with what you understand that to be, so that you have clear marching orders going into 2025. And we just think that's super critical. And we could just be waiting. And, we're service providers. Our clients happen to be internal. And so we can direct and impact that so much.
And if you don't have a seat at the table for the strategic planning, have you asked? Have you brought up all the reasons that we've just been talking about of why the talent development strategy leads should be part of that discussion, because I can tell you from our conversations with firm leaders on any kind of strategy, talent is a big part of that discussion. I mean, we don't have any kind of strategy discussions with firms where talent isn't a large piece of what needs to be spoken about. And so it makes sense that you would be engaged in that conversation. And then think of the trends that you have purview to from learning and development that you're doing, discussions like what we're having right now. And you can bring those insights, which makes you more invaluable to the team as well. So I just wanted to add in there that sometimes we got to create our own seat at the table, and maybe HR hasn't normally been invited, but there's certainly a lot of things that have been changing about the way things normally were done. And so somebody has to ask to start creating that change. And so I just wanted to add that in there, that
Yeah.
sometimes we have to create our own invitation to be at that meeting. And so it's worth at least bringing it up and being part of perhaps at least a section of the strategic planning discussion. I also liked what you talked about with really making sure that we're aware of what the business development strategy is, and especially if there are niches that are being created. Because when you're doing campus recruiting and so forth, are there some new professors that we should be forming some relationships with? Are there some new schools within the college that we should be getting to know? So, with that, we could certainly be bringing in talent that maybe doesn't have that traditional accounting degree, but could certainly be a huge asset to our team, especially as different specializations are being discussed. And then when you're looking at experienced hires, which I know is always a challenge in the profession, we can go look at experienced hires of people who may be leaving industries that are part of the specialty, but they're not really ready to be done. And so they could offer a different type of advisory role or mentorship or learning that they could be doing for your team that could really create a lot of subject matter expertise within the team. But this is where we want to create that, get innovative and how we're solving for some of those problems. And then the other talent component, and this goes to what we've been talking about as well with the National Pipeline Advisory Group and their findings, is really looking at with talent, where do we get more of it? And so not only are we looking at maybe outsourcing or offshoring options, but are we also looking at talent importing options? And it's interesting that that's coming, and you could really bring something very different to the strategic conversation by sharing what some of those options are, and that there are companies out there that would help you bring this wonderful talent actually to the country, as opposed to sending our work out of the country. And so if that's not on your radar, you may want to look into that further and look at that as something for 2025 that could be part of your talent strategy.
Yeah. Gosh, love all of those. And as I'm listening, that's one of the things to really think about. How can you be the thought leader? Samantha said, how do you bring these ideas? How do you generate it? Sometimes we could sit back and go, that's not really HR. Well, that's not really talent, but it is. It drives, talent drives everything. And if we don't have the talent, we're not going to be able to grow. We're not going to be able to start these new initiatives. We're not going to be able to, work on internal projects. We're not going to get further in technology and AI and those things. So, really talent in HR, fits in everything. And I know one of the big topics, this past year or so, maybe a little longer, has been growth, and it's going to continue to be growth. How do we grow? And we're still maybe a little bit like, how are we going to grow? Who's going to do the work when we still have the capacity? Our partner, Jennifer Wilson's been saying that the market is spongy right now. We know it's a little uncertain for a variety of reasons. And, it'll probably continue to be that way through the end of the year, first of next year. But inside of that, we still think talent is primary. Number one thing that we need to be working on, our number one asset for sure. And then figuring out our right client strategy so we can make sure we have, the right ideal clients. We're calling clients, we're creating that capacity by right sizing some clients. All of that is, great conversation to be having from a people perspective. Often we just look at it from a BD and growth perspective, but we have to then say, where do the people fit? And that's where you could offer a very unique perspective and even drive those conversations if we're not having them. Or again, if you're not involved in them, you could go find out. You could raise it and say, I just wanted to know what you're talking about, from these perspectives. Similarly, what are we doing and what's our position around remaining independent, mergers and acquisitions, private equity funding, and what's our positioning out to our team and then out to the market when we're recruiting? And, there's all kinds of great positioning you could be creating depending on what your strategy is. So for example, if you are saying we're going to, remain independent, that could differentiate you. It could provide some confidence for your team members. First of all, we need to be messaging that. And we know nothing is always, fixed in stone for 100 years. We're not saying that, but, our strategy right now, what we foresee for our future is we're going to work to remain independent. We're going to grow. We're going to, work on these, specialty service or industry areas. We're going to make alignments with partnerships where we don't have the services. We're going to focus and invest in people and technology. Like if that's your message, then we should be positioning that. And you also should be positioning that externally because it does differentiate you from other firms that have different strategies and vice versa, of course, right? But make sure you know what the strategy is and the partnership is aligned on it, and create some frequently asked questions and some positioning statements that we could all be consistently saying from the leadership team. And then we could use, in our communications, we could use in our recruiting, we could use on our website, we could even create communications with our clients. They might be wondering about it. And we should be coaching and advising them on all these opportunities. So it helps us gain the confidence to do that as well.
Yeah. I so appreciate that you said all of that, because there is worry that that is out there, and that is absolutely people related. And so if those items are all being discussed strategy wise, and if it's not being said to the teams, especially when you have partners getting close to retiring, or maybe we are doing a culling strategy to create capacity or get more strategic in who we're serving, people start telling stories about maybe I'm going to lose my job. And, there's different things in the news, and we just have to realize that they're aware as well. And so when there's an absence of the information, they're going to start making up what they think is going to happen. And that is a huge asset that you can bring to the leadership team of how do we get that communication out. And Tamera just gave you multiple ideas. And it really takes us to the beginning of where we started too, of just brushing up on those good habits and getting back into them. And so I just love what you shared.
Yeah. So there's your list. Your job is to go prioritize. And prioritize between now and the end of the year, and then communicate it, because that helps manage expectations. And there might be some resetting of expectations or delays. Like we're gonna put this to the side right now because we're gonna focus on these three things. So it just gives you an opportunity to communicate, message that both to the leadership team and then to your counterparts in operations, and then also to the rest of the team, and then figure out what your priorities are for 2025. And you might be doing that inside of some leadership retreats this fall. You might need to go drive it, and then get approval for it, whichever way you need to go. At least you have a starting place to say, these are my big buckets. Here's what I'm going to start in the first quarter or first 6 months of 2025. So, and again, we'd love to hear your list. We'd love any questions or anything that you might need about navigating some of these conversations. You can just let us know, reach out to us. And we hope you have a great last week of September. And we will see you again. Exactly. And we will see you again next Monday. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank
Bye.
you.